parenting is the hardest job in the world. It is so hard, and we all want to be really good at it. We all want our kids to be, we're bringing up our kids to be independent. We want them to be well-rounded. We want them to love people. We want them to sort of, we want so much from our kids, and we put all this pressure on ourselves to do that. And yet there's only so much we can do.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited for this week's guest, Rebecca Michi. She is a children's sleep consultant based out of Seattle, and we really dive into a lot of the specific challenges that new parents or parents of multiple kids or toddlers face, in particular when it comes to getting them to sleep. This is kind of the first episode where we've dove into parenting specifically, but I wanted to encompass everything with this show. And we think about In Pursuit of Better, that can include becoming a better parent and better role model for our kids. And it's tough in society today when we see all these comparisons or what we should be doing as workers, as business people, as parents. It can be tough. And I really like Rebecca's message because it touches on the fact that we all struggle as parents, and to be open and honest about that and find support is really important. So I really enjoyed our conversation today. Hope you guys get something from it, but let's dive into the conversation with Rebecca. All right, Rebecca, well, I wanted to say thanks again for joining us today. And we were chatting a little bit before, but I want to get a good idea of what a sleep consultant is, and then kind of we'll dive backwards to see how you kind of got into that role. But what is it that you do?
So I help families to teach their children to sleep better, have an easier time sleeping. Sleeping is something that as adults that we love, but as children we kind of detest. And so I want to help families get their children loving sleep as much as we do.
Why is it so important? I mean, it's probably seems like a simple question, but why is it so important for kids to get sleep and sleep appropriately?
Well, we think that when we think about sleep, we think sleep is being, a really natural thing. We all do it. We have to do it. And so you think that it's a really natural thing, but actually learning to sleep independently is a learned skill. And when it comes to being a new parent, we kind of do whatever we need to do to get sleep. Sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture. And when you've become a parent, you can see why it is really effective. And so we end up doing whatever we need to do to get as much sleep as possible because of a whole multitude of reasons. We've got to be back at work and just society, just a lot of reasons that we need our children to be sleeping. And when most of the time I'm working with families who kind of got to that point where something's got to change. It's just not sustainable. And so that's when I come in and help families then make those positive changes to be teaching more independent sleep skills.
What I like about your system and mainly just your message like on Instagram is you talk a lot about taking the pressure off of like ourselves as parents, where it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay that you don't have all the answers. So when you're meeting with people or you're talking to first-time parents, is it usually about teaching specific skills in order to help your kids fall asleep, or is it more about that training the parents to understand that it's a process and it's a challenge?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. A lot of my work is actually educating families on what's normal when it comes to sleep, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on what actually is normal when it comes to children's sleep. So we had set ourselves up with unrealistic expectations to begin with. So that's part of my job, is looking at what's actually normal. Once we're then looking at what's normal, we're then looking at what's normal for your child, because there's this whole range when it comes to what normal is. So we need to find out exactly how much sleep it is that the child needs. And then once we are able to kind of like let that guide us, we're then able to make tweaks and changes. But yeah, Parenting is incredibly frustrating. It's one of these things that you think is going to be really easy because, I mean, the human race is still going, so it's kind of, it must be easy, but it's not. And there's a lot of conflicting advice on absolutely any parenting topic. There is a lot of conflicting advice. I mean, you just need to search for anything online and you'll come up with a bazillion pages. Every single one will contradict the last one. And so that's really frustrating as well. That leads to a lot of frustration, is that you just don't know what's going to work for your child.
And that prompts a lot of questions, because what my wife and I found, like when we had our first child, and I guess I didn't realize, is that not only is there so much information out there with conflicting information, but everyone has an opinion about how you should be doing it or what the best method is. So I guess I want to dive back. You said it's figuring out what's normal. What is normal? Like, or how do you help someone define what's normal?
So normal, to be honest, is just a setting on your dryer. That's it. That's what normal is. That's really the only certain.
That's the only normal. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
We look at big ranges of normal, and that's generally in amount of wake ups that a child will do, the duration that they need to sleep. And then as well, looking that waking during the night is normal. And we're all after a child that's going to sleep through the night. That's all of our goals, is to have a child who sleeps through the night. We're setting ourselves up for failure with that goal, because there's not one person on the planet who sleeps through the entire night. We all wake during the night. Anything up to 10 times is normal. So range from 1 to 10 is pretty normal, and we will all wake during the night. So if you're after a child who is not going to wake, that's not going to happen. So you want a child who is an independent sleeper. So that's where they can get themselves to sleep. And then when these wake ups naturally happen, they're able to get themselves back down to sleep. But also then within this realm of normal is looking at, when are feeds going to happen during the night? Because children need to feed during the night. There is no set age, weight, or anything magical, mythical, scientific, anything of when a child does not need to feed during the night. Some 6-week-olds are no longer feeding during the night, and some children will actually be feeding during the night until they're over a year old. Both of those are normal. And so that's obviously a huge, big range. Now, of course, we all want the 6-week-olds who are going to no longer feed during the night. We all want those, but the majority are not. Yeah, it's within that realm of normal because some are doing it, but most are not. And that's how a lot of sleep information out there is that you look at what's that. It's presumed because some can, that all can. And we know that that's not the case. Some children are rolling over at 10 weeks. Others are nearer to 5 months. Both are normal. Now, we're not sending 6-week-olds, or really young children to a physical therapist because they're not rolling over when some can. We know that there's this realm of normal and they'll get there. And that's the same with falling asleep independently, and more importantly, with feeds during the night, is that just because some can does not mean that all can when it comes to feeding during the night.
I never thought of it in terms of I wake up during the night, because I probably have that typical frustration where it's like, if you're tired, like kids are angry when they're tired and they don't want to sleep. It's like, well, if you're just go to sleep, then that would solve all your problems. Everybody's problem. But I never thought about it that we, even as adults, it's normal to wake up. We just know how to then go back to sleep.
Yeah. And we're really good at it. We're really good. I mean, most of us are really good. If you have insomnia, that's where you struggle, is the falling asleep, the falling back asleep part is where you struggle. But with that kind of, if you don't have insomnia, you're really good at falling back asleep. You may just roll over and you not even realize that you woke up. You woke up, but you rolled over, you were able to get down to sleep. There are going to be other wake ups where you do look at the clock. You are more aware of it, but very quickly back down to sleep. If you don't have those skills to get yourself back to sleep, you're relying on something or someone. If that thing or that person is not there, you're not able to get back down to sleep. So if you rock your child to sleep, they're going to naturally wake during the night. If you're not continuing to rock them during the night, chances are they're going to need help. And that's where you then step in, rock them, they get back down to sleep. If they're hungry, then they're going to need a feed to sleep. And that's where things get a little bit tricky, is that children will still need to feed during the night until they're ready to stop. And trying to keep a child awake during the night whilst they're feeding is nigh on impossible. It's a really, really hard thing to do. And so you do end up feeding back to sleep during the night, when you may be thinking, well, is my child now relying on the feeds to get to sleep? Well, if they're hungry, they're probably not going to be sleeping if they're hungry anyway. And it's just I'm trying to sort of balance all of this, as to look at, okay, is my child hungry? Are they just requiring this feed in order to get back to sleep, or do they have these skills to do it themselves? A child who has the skills to get themselves to sleep will be able to do so when they are not hungry during the night. And then they'll need to feed, and then they'll be able to get back to sleep.
I feel like that's a key differentiator, right? Like they actually have to be satiated to.
Yeah, exactly. None of us sleep well if we're hungry. We all get hangry.
For sure. So like one of the biggest controversies is obviously like the cried out versus more of a gentle approach. And when you talk about like there's independent sleeping, being them able to put themselves to sleep, I think that's where a lot of people were like, well, that's why you just leave them and let them figure it out. But your approach is the very gentle, even you say very gentle. So talk to me about how you decided or came upon, like what's your basis for doing that approach versus a more cried out or like Ferber method and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I have two kids who are now 18 and 19 years old. So they are now amazing sleepers, don't want to get up, are really, really good at it. But they didn't start out that way. They started out very, very different sleepers. My eldest, we called him the amazing non-sleeping baby, because he was just very adverse to sleep for a very long time. My youngest has a very different personality and would sleep a little easier, but found it hard to kind of get there, but would sleep a little easier. So I had a very small age gap between my two kids, just 14 months. And pregnancies were the same. And I was so intrigued by how different their sleep was, even though sort of, they were just very different people, and they slept very, very differently. So this kind of got me looking at who their personality is and how that impacts sleep. And so that's when I started off on my working with sleep journey, which was many, many years ago, over a decade. I've been working solely with sleep. I started looking at how a child's personality and their temperament will impact the way that they sleep. It also impacts in the way that they learn, and the way that they learn these independent sleep skills. So I like to work with a child's unique temperament. I call it their sleep personality, work with their sleep personality. And generally, I'm working with families who have children who have a more intense and spirited child. So these children are the ones that really struggle with sleep. That was my eldest, really struggle with sleep. And we need to use really hands-on, gentle techniques to work with these children, because these are the techniques that work. If you're trying to leave an intense, spirited child to cry, they will cry and cry for hours. The longest I've heard of is somebody contacted me years ago. Everybody had been telling her to cry it out. She had a really intense, I think he was about 8 months old. Everyone, including a pediatrician, said, just leave him to cry. He cried for 8 hours. And that's when the parents gave up. That was not when he fell asleep. They kept going in and doing those time checks, and it just didn't work, because he got himself more and more worked up. And when you got that level of crying, the child's beginning to panic, and nobody's sleeping when they're panicking. So working with a child's unique temperament. And so that's why, mainly using hands-on, gentle techniques are going to work for those intense spirited children, but they work for all children. And I feel as well, we work on during the day, creating a real secure attachment with our children during the day. Why does that change? Why should we just ignore them when they're asking for help at nighttime? Now, it's one thing being fussy and just kind of like, oh, I'm awake, it's really annoying. Yeah, I get it. That's kind of easy to ignore. Your child is just kind of like, fussy. They're moaning about being awake. They're not asking for help at that point. But it's when it gets to that bigger, urgent, I need you now cry. That's one that should never, ever be ignored, because your child is asking for help. We wouldn't ignore an elderly person. You wouldn't, if there was an elderly person in bed saying, I need someone to come and help me, you wouldn't just be like, they'll figure it out. You go and help them. And it's the same with your child. If they're really needing help for whatever reason, then I always feel that you should go and help them, regardless of whether it's 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. Yeah, it's miserable getting up for the 15th time at 3 a.m. I get it. It's really miserable. But if your child really, really is asking for help, you should go and help them, because we want to continue with that secure attachment. And don't we want our children to know that you're always going to be there for them, regardless of that day or time. If they're needing some help, we want them to feel confident that you will be there and you will help them. Because I tell you, when your kids become teenagers, that's when they want to talk, is at 11 o'clock at night, just after you're getting ready for bed. That's when they want to talk, and they're going to open their heart to you. And yeah, it's miserable because you're thinking, I need to be up really early tomorrow, but you just kind of got to suck it up, because you want your kids to know that you're going to be there for them. And unfortunately, that means 24/7.
Wow. And that was so much good information. And it's like the perspective of, just because they can't verbalize exactly what they're needing.
Yeah.
But you still want to be there to support them. So is this, and then this again, a little bit, I don't know, but is the methods that you chose based on like pediatric medical research, or is it just based on your experience and what's been helpful for all the clients you've worked with? Like what is the basis for like gentle versus crying it out?
So the gentle that I use, it's my own technique that I use, that I spent years developing. And we really initially help the child get to sleep, and then we work on gradually getting less and less involved. So the child is slowly becoming more independent. So depending on the child's sleep personality and their age, lots of different things we take into consideration, depends on how big these steps are. It can be really, really tiny little steps of getting less involved, as much as slowing up the rocking. If you're rocking a child to sleep, beginning to slow that up, and then doing that over a series of a week to the point where you're hardly rocking at all. So this is the start of getting less involved, but it can be much bigger steps as well. And then we work on slowly getting you less involved to more independence. And it's just with a lot of working with families for a long time that I came up with this. And you can't go wrong. If you pick up your child when they're asking for help, and you soothe them when they're needing that help, and you lay them down then when they're soothed, you can't go wrong. You can't pick up too many times. You can't be over helping, because if you're just kind of like following those simple rules of pick your child up whenever they need help, soothe them however they need to be soothed, and then when they're soothed, you lay them back down, and then if you need to be hands-on, you can help them again, then you can't go wrong. Just follow those rules and you can't go wrong. When it comes to cry it out, the idea is that you lay your child down, and generally with Ferber, it's these timed checks, and you need to leave your child until it is time for you to go in, whether, and it can be just a minute, it can be 10 minutes. But if your child instantly needs help, you've got to leave them for the remainder of that time. So if they're needing help and they're getting to that, because they don't know what's happening, they've never done this before. Well, they're beginning to, you're leaving them for a while, and they're getting urgent cry, they're panicking. And when they're panicking, then the fight or flight response has been triggered. Nobody's falling asleep with that. So just the way that I think of it is, think of if you were just going for a nice hike in the woods, and you came across a bear. And you start running because the bear's coming at you. You start running, you're panicking, you're running. You've never run that fast in your entire life. You're panicking, and you find a cabin, and you get in that cabin and you lock the doors. You've never run that fast in your entire life, or that far in your entire life. And you're tired because of that. You don't instantly think, oh, I'm tired now, I'm going to just take a little cheeky nap. You don't do that. You're still panicking. And the longer that you leave your child with that big, urgent, panicky cry. Remember, this isn't just the fussy cry. This isn't a fussy. This is the big, urgent, panicky cry. The longer that you leave them with that, the more that fight or flight, the more cortisol that's going through their system, the less likely they are to sleep. So with that kiddo that I worked with who cried for 8 hours, he was panicking for a lot of that time. And that's why he couldn't sleep.
Because in theory, you're just leaving them longer with the bear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. No, so then what was your background before becoming a parent? Like what?
So
what work did you do?
I worked with families in many, many different capacities. So I have a degree in child development. So I've worked with many different capacities with families. Been a nanny. I've managed daycares. I worked with all sorts of different capacities with families. I started out my business just as a general parenting consultant. So working with families who had toddlers who were having tantrums, and 9 times out of 10, once we got the sleep kind of resolved, everything else would fall into place. So we were dealing with a toddler who's having lots of tantrums. When we get down to it, okay, yeah, that toddler's only getting 5 hours sleep a night. No wonder they're having lots of tantrums during the day. Let's fix the sleep. Everything else fell into place. So I decided that I need to be really concentrating on sleep. And when I did that, I was one of 2 sleep consultants on the West Coast. There were 2 of us. There were a few more on the East Coast. There were kind of like none in the middle of the US. It was just, there were just a few of us. It was a really kind of like new thing when I got started, which was about 13, 14 years ago.
Well, it seems like it's a needed thing too. The more you talk, the more it's like, because I think a lot of people fall into this, you want one solution that would work, but the way you describe it, do you actually build on almost profile for each child? Because you talked about their sleep personality, you talked about their age being a factor. So is it part of that consulting is actually building literally a sleep profile?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So a lot of times when I initially will talk with families, I ask them sort of where sleep is right now, and then what's historically has been going on with sleep. And so just with that, I can 9 times out of 10 tell what the sleep personality is of the child. So it's either laid back, and easygoing, shy, slow to warm up, and intense and spirited. So I'm able to tell from that conversation as to what sleep personality that child has. And then they'll fill out the information on questionnaire. They do take a sleep personality quiz as well, because that really helps me to see, because they may be more intense and spirited, but they're probably not going to be intense and spirited with everything sleep related. They may love to go through their nighttime routine, but it's that last bit of falling asleep that they don't really like. So it's looking to see where exactly they are. They're going to be more laid back with some areas and more slow, shy in other areas, and then more intense and spirited with others. So every single family does that sleep personality quiz, because that really just is a really good way of being able to tell what things we can do, what we need to steer very far away from, as well as the pace that we need to work at. Then we're looking at things at the child's age, but it's also then looking at the family dynamic, where the child is sleeping. Are they sharing a room with their parents? Are they sharing a bed with their parents? Are they more independent? And looking at, obviously, then any medical issues, anything like that. But, are there other carers? Trying to get a real good sense of everything that's happening with the family really helps me then to be able for us to hit the ground running, be able to start making some real positive changes. The way that I work as well, it's not a quick fix. And I know when it comes to sleep, because most people, when you're looking like, okay, I need to change something, you're at that crisis point. You're just like, I can't do another night. And so that's why we want that kind of quick fix. When you're working with these more slow, gentle techniques, it's not quick. As I say, it may take you a week to slow up that rocking. So you're doing minimal rocking as you're rocking your child to sleep. That's not quick. And so that's another hard thing, is that I know when you're searching for solutions with sleep, you're kind of at that rock bottom. And I'm not going to be, we can start getting some better sleep. We can start making things easier, but it's going to take us weeks for really to see the results. Now, I know there are other sleep consultants out there who are using different techniques and different methods and who will get quicker results. And that's great. But the families that I work with, I work with families privately, I work with families for about 6 weeks, maybe even a little bit longer, because we break everything up. We start working on our night times first. Well, we start working on our daytimes, looking at making sure our timings are right, getting some really nice, lovely sleep-inducing routines for our nap time and for our nighttime, working on those, beginning to get less involved. And at this point on week 1, I'm looking to see changes that we make with sleep. How is the child going to react? How are they going to do? Again, that gives me more of an insight into who the child is. And then come week 2, that's when we start working on our night times. And that may just be beginning of the night, maybe the entire night. Once we've then spent a few weeks working on our nights, then we'll start working on our naps. So we're breaking it up again into these tiny bite-sized steps, which can be pretty frustrating. I get that, but we want to get results with sleep that get there as quick as possible, get there as easily as possible, meaning that as minimal tears as possible, so as easy for the family as possible. But we also want to get results that are going to last, because we know sleep is something that is constantly evolving throughout our entire lives. Sleep evolves, and we know that there's things that are going to come up, especially with children. There's teething, there's illness, there's sleep regressions, there's so much that happens just needing less sleep. There's just so much that happens with sleep. We don't want it all to go out of the window once we hit our first block, where sleep regression, or we move house. We don't want it to be then that your child forgets everything. We want it to be that we've got really good long-term results, so that we can navigate all of these changes that we know that are coming in the future, and make that as smooth and as easy and as smooth sailing as possible.
How do you handle those hiccups, those sicknesses and sleep regressions? Is it we kind of pause the training, or is it almost more training? Like what's the process?
It depends on what that illness is, really. So if it's just a little bit of a mild cold, we'll probably carry on. But often, especially right now, and there doesn't seem to be any mild colds anymore. They're really knocking us out. So we put everything on pause. You just do whatever you need to do to get everybody the best sleep possible. We can always work on getting you back on track once everybody's feeling better. But it doesn't mean you've got to be feeling, especially with colds, especially with kids and colds. If you have children who has a cold, the snot, there is snot everywhere, and that hangs around for a real long time. Don't feel you've got to wait until all of that congestion is gone. No, we want to make sure that your child is not having a fever, that they're not really uncomfortable. Then we can start getting back on track. There's always going to be these, because children are teething. There are all these different things happening. So it does sometimes feel it's just stop and start and stop and start. But that's going to be the same once you're throughout your child's entire life. And I kind of like it when I'm working with families and we do get an illness, because what you do will always be the same. You'll always do whatever you need to do, but getting back on track will always be the same as well. So at least if we're working together as we're getting back on track, then you know what to do in the future.
Because they can get discouraged, right? If they no longer have you or whatever. And it's like, now, am I doing something wrong?
Yeah.
You talked initially about the first consulting experience being around just parenting as a whole and childhood development. And I want to step back again to the cried out method, because some people, swear by it and have found success with it. But do you, in your opinion or in your experience, has there been like more of that long-term, maybe not even behavioral side effects, but does it seem to impact kids longer term?
Yeah, there have been studies done on this that show that there are no long-term behavioral issues with children who are left to cry it out. So there are studies have been done. But I mean, I live in Seattle and we're kind of like, we're kind of crunchy here. But there used to be meetup groups for adults who were left to cry it out as children. So this is impacting people in ways that you may not think. But behaviorally, no studies show that there is no behavioral. But remember, that's for the children that Cry It Out worked for. So
that's a good point.
So there are a lot of children that Cry It Out doesn't work for, and those are the ones it's just not going to work. So the ones Cry It Out works, it works great for a lot of families, and it never really gets that big urgent cry. It's sort of like you'll know within 20 minutes whether it's going to work or not. And by all means, give it a go. Definitely give it a go. If you ever get to that big urgent cry, and you know that one, it's that one that makes you kind of jump out of bed before you're awake. It's that real big cry. If it ever gets to that, or if it seems to be ramping up at 20 minutes, then it's generally not going to work. If you kind of get stopping and starting and fussing and singing and chatting and talk within that 20 minutes, keep going. So chances are it's going to work. But it's just big urgent cry, it's kind of game over. If you get to that point, your child's not going to just suddenly be able to calm themselves down from that panic to be able to fall asleep. They may fall asleep, and oftentimes what we'll see is a child will then, who's got to that big panicky, they'll cry for hours and hours, they'll fall asleep, maybe sleep for 20 minutes, and then they're awake and they're up and they're crying again, because they just fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, just had enough of a nap to then wake them up because they're not getting sound sleep because they're panicking.
Yeah.
And then they're up and awake and they're big cry again. So sometimes we see it, but that doesn't mean it's working. That means that they just were so exhausted that they just couldn't keep going.
That sounds sad.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And that's the thing. I get a lot of flack online for this, but you don't need to leave your child cried out. And I'm not judging anybody that does.
Right.
It works for a hell of a lot of families. It works really, really well. But you don't have to use it. Even with laid back, easygoing children that cry it out would work. You don't have to do it. There's other techniques that you can use that will work, because it's just, I mean, remember, and you know your child better than anybody, better than absolutely, you know whether it's likely to work or not. If you think it's going to work, chances are it's going to work. Most times families will be like, I know that cried out, everyone's saying to cry out, I know it is not going to work for my child. Then chances are it's not going to work. If you think it's not going to work, it won't work. So don't even try it, because it's just a lot of stress for everybody. It's a lot of energy as well to do that. And it just then will make sleep more of a challenge, because now we're getting some trust issues as well then with your child. And can they trust that you're going to be there when they're asking for help? Can they trust that their bed is a safe place, and that it's that they can be comfortable there? Now we've got to then rebuild all that trust, and that's hard to do.
Yeah, and I'll quit harping on the cry it out. You hear so many things, so it's like I like to get your expertise on the differences there. But one thing I want to switch to and talk about a little bit is, you mentioned like where the child's sleeping. So bed sharing or co-sleeping, how does that impact the training? Or like if someone's doing, I'm asking because that's what we ended up doing. How does then that transition work to then getting them independent? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'll often work, because I am much more gentle. I'll often work with families who are bed sharing and co-sleeping, and some of them want to continue doing so. They want to have more independent sleep, and they want to continue bed sharing, and that's great. Others are just like, no, I am done being poked in the eye and kicked in the stomach all through the night.
Right.
Now it's time to stop. And so again, it's looking at the whole child's sleep personality as to, are we going to work more on changing the room first, or are we going to work on more of those independent skills first? So looking at who the child is, as well as looking at what the parents generally know, which sort of like, okay, they need to be out of the bed. Okay, let's work on that first, and then we can work on that more independence. So there are different ways that you can do it. If you want your child to comfortably sleep somewhere, they need to be comfortable with that space, and that comes with play. So if you want to change their bed or the room, they need to be really comfortable with that space. So that comes with play. So I know a lot of information online is that your child should only sleep in their bed. It shouldn't be for anything else. The only time that they ever go in there and they start like wondering where the heck they are because they've never been in there before, they're not just going to sleep. The same way as when you sleep in a hotel. It feels different. It looks different. It smells different. You don't sleep great for the first couple of nights that you're in a hotel. So it's going to be the same for your child. So they need to be comfortable with the space. So playtime. So not associated with sleep, not when they're tired, not when they're hungry, just as part of their playtime during the day, in their room and in their bed where you want them to be sleeping. And just start small, just a couple of minutes, and get them out when they're having the time of their life, because that makes the going in the next time so much easier to do. So just like you're going to be staying right there with them, playing with them, and then get them out. And then just do that 3 or 4 times a day. And so that they're really getting comfortable with the space and comfortable with the room as well. That's then really helpful for when you then want your child to be sleeping a bit more independently, because then they know what the space is. They know that it's a good space. They know that we want it to be that they can wake up and they're not like, oh my gosh, where the heck am I? Get me out of here. That they're actually thinking, oh yeah, it's actually pretty cool in here. I kind of like it. Instantly freaking out. So they may then be like, oh yeah, this is okay. And they're going to be much more comfortable with the space. If you're moving away from bed sharing as well, it's never an all or nothing. So you could start just the beginning of the night. Start by doing your bedtime routine in the new room, and then go into your bed to fall asleep. Then start doing more of that routine, and then you can even start getting your child to sleep in their room, putting them then in their bed in their room. But that first wake up, because they will wake up, just bring them in with you. And then they can, over the coming weeks, you can have them spend more and more time in their bed. So again, not a quick fix. It's not sort of like they're done now, but that's just a much more gentler, easier way of making that transition from bed sharing. But for others, it's just like they need to be out now. And it's like, okay, how are we going to make that? How are we going to make that happen? So if that's the case, then that would be probably planning on sharing the room with your child. So if they're going to be in a different room, make up a bed on the floor so that you can be there, because if they're used to sleeping so close to somebody for potentially their entire life, and now you're going to be changing there in a different room on a different bed and you're nowhere near, then again, there's that whole wake up, and they could be freaking out, waking up, and that then makes them getting back into bed so much harder to do because they freaked out. So just by sharing the room with them for a few nights as they get used to that, still pick them up, help them to sleep, however you've been doing. But once they get comfortable with the change, they're going to have an easier time sleeping there. So practice makes progress with everything sleep related. It doesn't ever make perfect, but it makes progress. The more they do something, the easier it will be. And so that could be with holding a child to sleep rather than rocking them to sleep, or moving them room, or changing the bed. It's going to be tough to begin with, but they'll get used to it. And so you may find that actually sleep seems to get really challenging. They really struggle to fall asleep. They're waking up way more often, but they'll get used to it. And so because we want that quick fix, which I understand, we all want that quick fix. When we want that quick fix, you think, well, this isn't working. We're actually going the wrong direction. We've got more wake ups happening in each night. It's taking me longer to get them down to sleep, but I've got more wake ups. You think it's not working. You've got to trust the process. If you make changes take a while to get used to, depending on your child's sleep personality, will depend on how long that is. But we can go, I'm working with families right now, and we are moving from feeding to sleep, and we are now holding to sleep or laying with as a child is falling asleep. Initially, they took an incredibly long time, to the point, actually, we have a maximum cutoff point. And they would get to their cutoff point, which is like, whatever, 45 minutes. They'll get to their cutoff point for 4 nights. And then night 5, their child's able to fall asleep. And this child has either been rocked to sleep or fed to sleep for their entire life. And now we're not doing that. We're just encouraging them to fall asleep with a parent there, but on the bed. And it takes 4 or 5 nights before then they're able to do it. And then we see gets faster and faster and faster improvement. So it's just kind of like trusting the process, making some changes that you are manageable and sticking with it.
When you say that nothing's a quick fix, but really 4 or 5 nights isn't that crazy. It's not that, I mean, especially for when you're thinking about a long-term solution to such an issue.
Yeah. But we all want that like instant, don't we? We all want that. That's, and I understand it. Sleep deprivations, is a form of torture. And so when you're up and you feel that things are going in the wrong direction, that you knew, if I rock my child, they're going to be asleep within minutes. Or I could not rock my child, and I have no idea how long they're going to be awake for. Right. It's like a no-brainer as to which one you want to choose. You want to be back to sleep. And so that's when, if you don't know that this is going to work, you're kind of like trying to trust a process that you're not sure is necessarily going to work. That's hard. That's definitely hard, especially when it comes to then, because it's your well-being. And when you're sleep deprived and you're tired, everything is affected. Your food choices, your relationships, it's the equivalent of driving over the limit when you are sleep deprived. And so your reaction times are the same as if it affects everything. And so we have that kind of self-preservation that we don't want to get that. We don't want it to get that challenging, which is generally why we're in that spot in the first place, because we do whatever we need to do to get as much sleep as possible, which is then why we find ourselves where things are really challenging. And then you want me to make it more challenging now? That's a hard sell.
I imagine so. Would you consider adding a sibling to the mix, like one of those hiccups or things that would create some tension to the whole process? And how do people overcome that?
It actually can be really helpful if you want siblings to be sharing a room. That can actually be a great way of having a child move out of your room, out of your bed, because there is another human being in the room. And generally, siblings are adored. And so being able to share a room with a sibling can actually be really, really helpful. A lot of people don't do it because they worry about a younger child waking an older child up. When children are in a deep sleep, they're in a pretty deep sleep. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And wake ups happen. So, they need to figure out how they're going to kind of get themselves back to sleep after a sibling has woken them up coughing or whatever, doing whatever. So they'll get used to it. It's actually a really great way of, I'd much rather, if I'm moving a child out of their parents' room or out of bed sharing, if we can go to siblings sharing a room, it's way, way easier than putting a child in a separate room.
Good to know. And then what about like traveling? Do you have tips for when people are not going to be at their house, or because it's not always the same? I mean, it's never the same setup, but you may not even have enough beds or whatever it may be. So what are some of those things that people need to think about?
That's a great question. We want to try and keep as many things as familiar as possible. So that could be your nighttime routine, your bedtime routines. You can do your routines, the exact same things in the exact same order that you do at home. Obviously, it's going to be in a different venue, but you can still read books at this and then do this and then do this. You can still do all of those. You can still take the books with you. Your child's favorite books, take those with you. If you always say good night to the same teddy bear, take that with you. So you can keep your routine as similar to that you do at home to make that as relaxing as possible. You can even do as much as take your child's pajamas and their sheet off their bed or off their crib, put that in a Ziploc bag. So you've taken their pajamas off. So in the sheet off the bed, it smells of home. It doesn't smell clean and new. Put those on when you get to your venue. So the bed smells like home. The pajamas will really smell of home because they come from being worn. And so those things can make things a little bit easier just by something as simple as that. But then expect sleep to get wonky. Your child is probably going to struggle to fall asleep. They're probably going to have more wake ups. Just deal with it. Just sort of like give them the extra help that they need and they'll settle into it. And don't worry that if you end up having to bed share because there's not enough beds whilst you're away, you just want to make sure then when you get back home that you're back on track. So that means that you are back to how you do things when you're at home. So if your child has been sleeping independently, but they've not, or they're in their own room, but now when you're traveling, you're all in the same room, then you don't want to spend a few nights when you get home, oh, let's just sort of like ease back into it before we then go our separate ways in different rooms. You want to do that. This is how we sleep at home and go straight back into that. Again, it may take you a night or two to get back on track. But generally, if you've been traveling for about a week, it'll probably take you 1-2 nights maximum to get back on track. The longer that you're away, the longer it'll take you to get back on track. But generally, a week or two, you're probably going to be 2 or 3 nights, and you're good.
Awesome. So I want to shift focus again to the parents for a second, because I think that a lot of times we get this skewed sense of what parenting should look like, whether it be from social media or maybe it's our parents telling us what they did when we were growing up. And you had a post recently that said it's okay not to love every second of parenthood. And I thought that was really cool because it's like giving people permission to be frustrated, to, there are times when you're going to be angry or, just upset with the whole process. So how do you help parents deal with the anxiety and the stresses of being a parent and being okay, kind of with those emotions while doing it?
I think being really honest. And so I like to be honest about saying, like if you've had a challenging night, like, wow, I'm really sorry, that sucks. That sounds really, really miserable. So just being really honest, as well as then being honest about things that have happened to me on my parenting journey, just with, knowing that other people are going through similar things, I think is huge, because we don't talk about when parenting sucks. We don't talk about when our kids are being really, really little terrors and they are just, one of those days where they just really kind of misbehave and you lose it and you start shouting. And we don't ever talk about that. We kind of all hide that. And I think a lot of that is from social media, is that we always post the good stuff. We always post about how, parent teacher conferences, how great the kids are. And my kids are just so awesome. They did this and the gymnastic meet and all of this stuff. Those are the stuff that you post. You don't post that oh my God, I lost it for the 5th time today. What are my neighbors going to think as I yelled at the kids again? We don't ever talk about that. And so it's sort of like something that it happens. We all do it. But it's just, we need to be more open about it. We need to be more open about when parenting sucks, when we don't like it. And, by all means, talk about the great stuff, because that's great. That kind of keeps us going. The good stuff keeps us going. But we just need to be really honest about, you don't have to love every second. There are some bits that and I'm sure we've all done it, when the kids just like, Mom, Dad, and you don't say it out loud, but in your head, you're just like, thinking like a few swear words and, like, what the heck now? And we've all done it. We've all thought that. And it's just, that's when and then when you think about it, you just think, oh my God, why am I thinking that? That's awful. But no, we all do it. It's parenting is the hardest job in the world. It is so hard. And we all want to be really good at it. We all want our kids to be, we're bringing up our kids to be independent. We want them to be well-rounded. We want them to love people. We want them to sort of, we want so much from our kids, and we put all this pressure on ourselves to do that. And there's only so much we can do. And kids are, though, they want to, they want what they want. They want to explore. They want to do all of these things. They want to do everything. And let them kind of get on with it. But it doesn't mean you've got to love every second of it. It really, really doesn't. Some of it is just awful. I mean, I'm very vocal with families that I work with about how much I hated the first 3 months of when my eldest was born. It was probably one of the lowest times of my entire life. I got a degree in child development. As I was pregnant, I was just so confident this was going to be really easy for me, and I was going to be the best mom on the planet. You were not going to get any better than me. It was going to be a breeze. I was just going to be, I was going to be wearing the baby in a baby carrier and baking cakes. And it was just my baby was going to be sleeping, wasn't going to have a pacifier. I was going to breastfeed, and it was going to be super easy. And it would just be so calm and relaxed. And it was anything but. The first 3 months after my son was born was the hardest time of my life. That level of sleep deprivation was just something else. It is just brutal. Breastfeeding was not in any way, shape, or form easy. I could barely remember what my name was, and it was just the worst time ever. I really, really disliked it. I was incredibly low. Once we got sort of past that 3 months, I felt like I remember thinking one day, oh, I think I made it. I think I made it. I think I survived that, because it now seems to be a little bit easier. Life got a little bit more predictable, and it got a little bit easier. And then it just sort of continued. There were still struggles every single day. But we got more and more, as we got more and more predictable, it just got a little bit easier. And again, practice makes progress. I got better at it, and it's never been easy, but it got easier, and we kind of found our rhythm. But up until that point, it was awful. It was I really, really disliked it. It was just terrifying. It really was. And I think part of it was terrifying because it was not what I envisioned. And what I envisioned was completely unattainable. Unattainable. And I think a lot of that was just like, whoa, maybe, and I remember thinking, one, maybe I shouldn't have been a parent. And I also remember thinking as well, which is just absolutely crazy, that maybe my son doesn't like me. Maybe he doesn't like me, because if he liked me, he wouldn't cry as much. If it'd be that simple.
It's just not rational.
I think spending a lot of time thinking about that, well, I wonder why he doesn't like me. What is it he doesn't like about me? I'm his mom. Of course he should like me. And spending far too long thinking about that. And it was just, yeah.
How
Sleep
did
deprivation.
how did it differ when you had the second one?
So this is the reason, one of the reasons why we have a real short age gap between the two, because I hated the first 3 months so much that I said to my husband, if we're ever going to have any more kids, it has got to be sooner rather than later, because I know that I'm not going to enjoy that first 3 months again, that I don't, it won't happen. If we leave it too long, it won't happen. So when my eldest was 3 months old, we started trying for our second. I found out I was pregnant the day before my eldest was 7 months old. I found out I was pregnant, and then my youngest was a month early. So we have a 14-month age gap. It was a little bit, because I knew what to expect. I knew sort of like, I knew how tough things were going to be, and I knew what to expect. So it wasn't easier. Again, very different child. So a little bit more laid back, easygoing, which definitely made that a little bit easier. But I think just that whole sort of like, okay, I know this is going to be really miserable for a good few weeks. I also would then felt having a 14-month-old, you're pulled in more directions. It's not just the baby. I've also now have a 14-month-old who I need to be keeping alive, as well as the baby. And so it was just I was being pulled in more directions. I had even less of myself. But to be honest, I think that kind of made it easier, because I had less time to think. And that kind of helped me have less time to think, because I was just felt a little bit more on autopilot. I was with a 14-month-old, been there, done that, know how to handle a newborn again. So that was a little bit easier as well. And just,
yeah, it'd be nice if you could start with the second one, because then you know exactly what to do. But the hard part's having then a toddler that's running around on it. So it's like, I know exactly how to handle the baby, but now I don't know how to do both.
Yeah. Well, when my youngest was born, my eldest wasn't even walking. So it was just like, it seemed like a really good idea at the time. But then, and I mean, the first 2 years from after my youngest was born are a complete haze. I mean, now they're 18 years old. So, like, it was a long time ago, but I have very few memories, to be honest, from when my youngest was born, because just so unbelievably exhausting. I wouldn't change it for the world. I really wouldn't change it for the world. But just, I look back at pictures and I think, I have no idea what's going on here. Absolutely no clue what we were doing, because I was there, we were doing it, but I don't remember it at all. Really, really don't. It was the most exhausting period.
But you think you struggled less mentally than with the first one, just because of the expectations that you put on yourself? Like with the first?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, though I did end up with postpartum depression after the birth of my. I think I probably had it after the birth of my first, and that went undiagnosed. For reasons that I was living in Brazil, where both my kids were born when I was living in Brazil. I didn't get diagnosed with postpartum depression until I'd moved back to England. So that was when my youngest was 7 months old. So it took a while. So I think that probably I'd been struggling with it for since my eldest was born. It was very, very different bringing up a child in Brazil. I had no family there. So it was just my husband and I, and he was working crazy hours, which was the reason why we were in Brazil, for his work. And so I think there was a whole multitude of reasons that I got postpartum depression. But I think one of those was potentially having 2 kids with such a short age gap, and support. That's the main thing. The support, I would say, is that I didn't have any support. It was basically just me and my husband when he was at home from work.
Was that hard to seek that help that second time, or did you get to a point where it was like, this is too much, I need someone to tell me what?
So with my first, I struggled with breastfeeding. So when I was pregnant, and I gave up very early with breastfeeding with my eldest, but I've managed to get support, knowing how hard. Again, it's like, well, breastfeeding's natural, it should be easy. Like, sleep's natural, it should be easy. so before my second was born, I managed to find support. There was no support in Brazil. So I would
Gotcha.
actually found support from somebody in England who I would send photos of, does this latch look okay?
Mhm.
I'd send her photos so that she could have a look and see. So I managed to get support beforehand. So that made things a little bit easier. And then when we moved out of Brazil, I knew I was struggling. And so then I made virtually one of the first things I did when we got to England was make an appointment with a doctor and get diagnosed with postpartum depression. Just get me on some antidepressants, please. I desperately need them.
And I didn't want to probe, but I think it's important for people to realize that even an expert in child development and sleep
hates
consultant,
parenting sometimes.
but you recognized it, right? And that's the key.
Yeah,
I mean,
it took a while. It took a while because there was a lot of that self-doubt. That again, I was like, I was going to be the best parent ever. This was going to be the easiest thing. I've worked with families. I've a degree in child development. This is good. If anyone's going to be the best mother, it's me. And that was then when it was hard. Was just like, actually, this sucks. This is not what I expected. There was a lot of me getting to grips with that and getting to an understanding with that, and then realizing that okay. Now this is not, after my second was born, this is now not baby blues. There's something more going on, which was again that whole it takes time. Am I going to bounce out of it? Is it going to be okay? And then I don't want to have postpartum depression. I just say I don't have it, I won't have it. And it's just, and it took a while. It took a long time. And that was just a very mild depression, but that was tough.
So like 18 years ago, we didn't have social media, but do you think that it came from a comparison, this idea that you weren't doing a good job, or that it wasn't what you thought, or was it just from your preconceived expectations of what it was going to be, and that, I should be this expert, and if other people can do it, I should be way better at it? Was it that, or do you think it was literally other people's opinions or comparison that made you feel that you weren't doing a great job?
So there was no social media like we have social media now, but I was part of online forums. So that was kind of our social media, was all these online forums that, just think back kind of 20 years ago, there was a lot of them. Yeah. So, and so I was on those. So there was that comparison, but that also really helped me. It was a real good community. So it was also then sort of a venting board as well. But it was that, again, people are really only posting about the good stuff, and about how great their child slept, and about how great their child is feeding, and how great their child is at gaining weight, and still posting mostly all the good stuff. Mm-hmm. So there was definitely that comparison for, why is my child not doing this?
And it's so many things too, especially for not only mothers, but I guess the primary caregiver. But when it comes to it, like we were comparing about breastfeeding, you're comparing about, it's just everything. And it can become a lot.
Yeah. It's really overwhelming. It's very, very overwhelming, because we've made sort of parenting a competition, haven't we? Really?
Yeah.
We have. Because when it comes to, it's like when it's even with infants, who's gaining weight the fastest, who's sleeping
Which is a weird
I know, yeah, exactly. It's kind of a weird thing, and it's probably really like the only time in our life that we're ever going to be gloating about
how much they weigh. Well, we talk about that too. It's like my wife and I are both kind of smaller people, so it's like that we can't make a huge baby but then we get caught up in that too, but I think it's because it's measured, right? They put you in a chart at the doctor's office of, here's their percentile, so of course you want to, well, if I'm not at the top, then
exactly, and you want to be 90th percentile. It's all sort of like this, we get gloaty about, my child's in the 90th. My eldest always was in the 90th percentile. My youngest was because she was premature, she was in the somewhere below the 5th percentile for everything. Mm-hmm. She's still petite now, 18 years old, still super petite. So but we have, parenting is a competition. It completely is. And so we are, my child sleeps for this long, and it's just like, it's not
healthy, right?
It's not healthy at all. But with everything we do, we make, throughout all of our lives, especially, with sleep related, as infants, it's how great they're doing at sleeping. As adults, we do that as how little sleep we can function on.
Yeah.
That's our competition then, isn't it? I only got 5 hours and I'm doing okay. No, you're not doing okay.
Yeah, it goes beyond parenting. I guess it's societal that it's everything's a competition now. So how does someone, I mean, besides just following your Instagram, because I think that that's a good place to start, but are there resources available, either
Mm.
maybe on your website, that someone can start to get, hey, I can't, I don't have time, or I don't want maybe want to do the one-on-one consulting because maybe you don't have time, but are there ways to get support and
Yeah.
information?
Yeah,
Um,
loads of ways to get support. So I have on my website, which is childrensleepconsultant.com. I've got a blog there, real extensive blog. Just you can search for anything, and no doubt there'll be a video or a blog post about whatever that is. So there's a lot of information on my blog. I also then have a membership site called Slumber Academy. And in Slumber Academy, we are looking at teaching you how to teach your child to sleep more independently, where you are looking at their sleep personality, and I try and break it up into these little bite-sized chunks of what it is that you need to do, how you need to adapt everything for your unique child so that you can teach them to be more independent sleeper. So Slumber Academy, you can find that on childrensleepconsultant.com, or even just at slumberacademy.com, you can find that. That's a great way of getting the support then that you need. We've got live Q&As every single week, so that if you do have questions, we can really help get that plan together, get all your questions answered, so that we can really personalize everything for you, and you can start making some really good progress really quickly.
that's all. How many people are in those live Q&As?
It depends.
Okay.
Like the last one I did last week, no one showed up. It was just me by myself. But sometimes we'll have 8-10 people on.
Right.
So the way that I like to do it is, because I know parents don't have time. Nobody's got time to sit through. I get it. So parents can submit their questions beforehand, and then I can answer it during the Q&A. I note down the times that I answer people's questions. So under the recording, you'll see, Simon, I answered your question at 34 minutes. So you can just skip right through. Now, by all means, watch all the questions, but you can just skip right through so you can get to the answer to your question, so that you don't need to spend an hour and a half watching everything and waiting for your question, because I know parents don't have time for that.
But then you keep those videos on and at the Slumber Academy.
The recording,
cool.
the recordings stay there. Yeah, they don't stay there forever. They're there we'll keep it there. We've got 2 weeks worth there, so that you've got plenty of time to watch that as you need to. Perfect.
Well, hey, I can't thank you enough for answering my questions and shedding light on such an important topic, and diving into all these different things. So I really appreciate your time today and bearing with me for all my questions.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and they were great questions. And I'm a sleep geek. I love talking about sleep.
That's awesome. All right, Rebecca. Well, I appreciate it again, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you.